Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Freshman English. We turn now in Unit 6 in our study of the hero, our study of the Odyssey, to maybe one of the most important and amazing moments in the history of the world. Nelson Mandela's famous inauguration speech that he gave on the 10th of May, 1994. However, before we get there on page 1201 and following, I'd like you to be in your hymnals on 1193 for just a second at level 2B, reminding you that we are now looking at philosophical assumptions at level 2B with literary analysis. We've already spent a few seconds with Chief Dan George's There Is a Longing, and now we're going to turn to this really remarkable speech, brief though powerful, Glory and Hope. Let's read a little bit about Mandela on 1201. By the way, when your textbook was published, Mandela was still alive, born in 1918. Put this in your notes. He dies the 5th of December, 2013, making him 95 years young at his death, and was, by all accounts, still had remarkable energy at the end of his life. Let's read a little bit about Nelson Mandela. Born in South Africa, a nation whose white government maintained a strict policy of apartheid or legal discrimination against blacks. In 1944, Mandela began protesting apartheid. 20 years later, after several arrests, he was sentenced to life in prison for acts of protest. So let's put this in our notes right away. Mandela, amazing story. He spends much of his adult life in a small prison room, a cell, where he was to be, supposedly, for the rest of his life. Keep reading. Freedom for a Man and a Nation. In 1990, after long years of imprisonment, Mandela was released. He continued to fight for equal rights for all South Africans. In 1991, apartheid was finally abolished. And in 1993, Mandela and South African President F.W. de Klerk shared the Nobel Prize for Peace. The next year, 1994, the 10th of May, write that down. The next year, Mandela became the first black man to be elected president of South Africa. And then, as we said already, contrary to what your textbook says, he passed away the 5th of December 2013. So let's put this in our notes. Amazing story. Here is a man who stood up to the racism of apartheid in South Africa, was given a life imprisonment, was released from prison, and then became the president of the country. Okay? Which led to a very interesting question. On the day that he took over the power of the country, right? Remember, he had been put in prison, treated really badly, many of his colleagues killed, tortured to death in prison. The obvious question was, when this guy finally gets full power, president of the country that put him in jail and killed many of his colleagues, what will he do as a black man to all of those white people who ran apartheid and did terrible things? So there were a whole lot of people watching on the 10th of May, 1994, to hear what he had to say. His speech you are about to watch and will read. I think, though, that it makes sense to watch a speech like this while we read along with a speech like this, to get some sense of what it is that he has to say. The title of this speech is Glory and Hope. By the way, background for the speech on page 1201, apartheid. In Afrikaans, one of the languages of South Africa, apartheid means apartness. Apartheid is the policy of segregation and discrimination that was once practiced against non-whites by the South African government. When apartheid became law in 1948, it affected housing, education, transportation. In order to help end apartheid, many nations reduced trade with South Africa. Apartheid was finally abolished in 1991. The speech that we are about to study is called Glory and Hope. You can move between reading the speech and watching the speech. We obviously will go through it as well. Let's now spend a few moments just watching and listening and reading this amazing speech. Here we go.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished guests, comrades and friends, today all us do, by our presence here, and by our celebrations in other parts of our country and the world, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. Our daily deeds as ordinary South Africans must produce an actual South African reality that will reinforce humanity's belief in justice, strengthen its confidence in the nobility of the human soul, and sustain all our hopes for a closeless life for all. All this we owe both to ourselves and to the peoples of the world, who are so well represented here today. To my compatriots, I have no hesitation in saying that each one of us is as intimately attached to the soil of this beautiful country as are the famous jacaranda trees of Pretoria and the mimosa trees of the bushveld. Each time one of us touches the soil of this land, we feel a sense of personal renewal. The national mood changes as the seasons change. We are moved by a sense of joy and exhilaration when the grass turns green and the flowers bloom. That spiritual and physical oneness we all share with this common homeland explains that the depth of the pain we all carried in our hearts as we saw our country tear itself apart in terrible conflict, and as we saw it spent, outlawed, and isolated by the peoples of the world, precisely because it had become the universal base of the pernicious ideology and practice of racism and racial oppression. We, the people of South Africa, feel fulfilled that humanity has taken us back into its bosom, that we, who were outlaws not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country. What is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. We trust that you will continue to stand by us as we tackle the challenges of building peace, prosperity, non-sexism, non-racialism, and democracy. We deeply appreciate the role that the masses of our people and their political, mass democratic, religious, women, youth, business, traditional and other leaders have played to bring about this conclusion. Not least amongst them is my second Deputy President, the Honorable F.W. de Klerk. We would also like to pay tribute to our security forces in all their ranks for the distinguished role they have played in securing our first democratic election and transition to democracy from blood-thirsty forces which still refuse to see the light. The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. The time to build is upon us. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. We succeeded to take our last steps to freedom in conditions of relative peace. We commit ourselves to the construction of a complete, just, and lasting peace. We have triumphed in the effort to implant hope in the breasts of the millions of our people. We enter into a covenant that we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable right to human dignity, a rainbow nation, at peace with itself and the world. As a token of his commitment to the renewal of our country, the new interim government of national unity will, as a matter of urgency, address the issue of amnesty for various categories of our people who are currently serving terms of imprisonment. We dedicate this day to all the heroes and heroines in this country and the rest of the world who sacrificed in many ways and surrendered their lives so that we could be free.
1204.
Their dreams have become reality. Freedom is their reward. We are both humbled and elevated by the honor and privilege that you, the people of South Africa, have bestowed on us as the first president of a united, democratic, non-racial, and non-sexist South Africa to lead our country out of the valley of darkness. We understand it still that there is no easy road to freedom. We know it well that none of us acting alone can achieve success. We must therefore act together as a united people for national reconciliation, for nation building, for the birth of a new world. Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Let each know that for each, the body, the mind, and the soul have been freed to fulfill themselves. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one or another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. I thank you.
All right, guys, so let's go to work now with a text like this. Let's ask some questions about, more particularly, how we want to address this text. Is a speech, so let's get that in our notes right away. This is a powerful speech. It is, however, not just any speech. It is an inauguration speech. It is not just an inauguration speech. It's a first in the world kind of speech in many ways. Now let's quickly jump to 3A. Obviously, we're going to pay attention to other speeches in the history of famous speeches. What are some of those that we have studied already? Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech will immediately come to mind. Let freedom ring. Notice that speech, which was given obviously several years before, that speech is in many ways kind of standing behind this speech as he uses the word freedom at the very end of the speech, no doubt. We'll also, for example, look at a speech like the Gettysburg Address of President Lincoln, and will of the people, for the people, by the people, shall not perish from the earth. That notion of the way in which a few words can suggest powerful emotions and purpose for a political purpose, right? Of course, as we said already at 2b, we want to be paying attention to a number of the rhetorical devices, write that term down, rhetorical devices that are being used in this very important speech. Many students have pointed out, by the way, the differences between the emotionality of the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King Jr. and the somewhat steady delivery you saw of Nelson Mandela. Mandela recognizing that there was tremendous emotion, hostility, resentment, anger, fear, that stood right behind all of the events that led up to this inaugural speech. And he obviously wanted to bring all South Africans together, so he's going to involve that repetition of the use of the word we over and over again. Let's analyze the speech as having three parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Let's go through it now on page 1202 and just talk at level 1 a little bit about what's going on. Notice he begins with, much like the previous text that we studied, and there is a longing, he begins with the idea of the phoenix bird, that idea of resurrection or redemption or somehow renewal in some way. Notice he says that extraordinary human disaster that which lasted too long must be born from it, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. That is to say, what we're doing here is being watched by all of the peoples of the world. To that degree, he elicits, we might say, the Declaration of Independence, the Jeffersonian document that you'll study in your junior year, a candid world, a watching world, if you will, right? Notice he says, justice is the key. Strengthened in a confidence in the nobility of the human soul that's so important to sustain all of our hopes. Notice again, from the very beginning, this is a very, let's put it in your notes, inclusivist document. He's trying to include everyone, right, in his discussion. Compatriots, he calls them. He uses the powerful symbol of trees. Let's put that in our notes. He loves the beautiful trees of South Africa. He mentions those trees. Why? Because trees, as we've often referenced Ruthie's tree in our conversations, trees are a powerful symbol, aren't they, of what? Growth, rejuvenation, right? And so to that degree, the trees matter. Notice the depth of pain, the last line on page 1202. He doesn't walk away from that pain, but he does say that we've got to find a way to get beyond the practice of racism and racial oppression. One of the things that made Nelson Mandela as a symbol so powerful was the argument that we as a people, as a human species, can overcome racism. It is possible. Racism and prejudice is not something that has to remain. This was his argument all through his life, certainly here in this speech. Notice the repetitions that begin with the we's on page 1202. We are moved, and then on to page 1203. We, the people of South Africa, we thank all our distinguished international guests, and we trust, notice he calls this a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. Notice he says the challenges are building peace, prosperity, non-sexism, that all genders are accepted, non-racialism, the prejudice, and of course he finishes with the word democracy, right? The next thing that he does in his speech, and these are the introductory comments, is to thank the second Deputy President, the Honorable F.W. de Klerk, who he had won the Nobel Peace Prize with. And then from there to the second part of the speech. Pay tribute to the security forces, and then he begins with the time for the healing of the wounds. See the repetition? The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. The time to build is upon us. Like all great leaders, let's put this in our notes. Like all great leaders, he recognizes that once you have gained the political power, the next step is building, rebuilding a broken, a fissured country. And he says, we've got to find ways to do that together. Notice, he says, we've achieved our political emancipation. Now he says we pledge to ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage. He says it's continuing. Here again, the challenges. He didn't walk away from the challenges. Poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and other discrimination. By the way, do notice how he keeps coming back to issues of gender discrimination, discrimination between males and females, and all of that as well, gender issues, right? He says next that he wants all South Africans, both black and white, to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable right to, and again this sounds inalienable, sounds very much like the Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, to human dignity. Then notice the dash, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world. Maybe the most famous line of this speech, a rainbow nation. Let's put it in our notes to be, he loves the symbolism of the tree. He loves the symbolism of the phoenix bird, but he loves the symbol of the rainbow. Reminding us at 3A of our little poem that we studied once, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. The rainbow often can serve as a symbol of hope, a symbol of maybe looking forward to stuff that can happen. At peace with itself and the world, right? He then asks immediately for amnesty for various categories of our people still imprisoned. He's aware that there are those there. He dedicates, much like Lincoln did in his Gettysburg Address, he dedicates the day to all of the fallen, to the ones who have died, many of them his own colleagues, his own brothers in arms. And he says, all of them died for a purpose. Now note the genius rhetoric.